Hi, let's learn about object destructuring in JavaScript. Object destructuring is a very useful feature to allow us to basically extract properties off of objects and turn them into variables. So let's say I came into here and created an object called person. And on person I had first name, and we said Bob, and I had last name, and I had Smith. Now, let's say I wanted to extract first name and last name as actual variables off of that particular object. I could say const first name, last name equal to person. When I do this, it's actually going to make first name and last name variables that I can then reference those values, Bob and Smith. So I could say console.log first name and console.log last name. So let's save that. Over here in my web browser, I have my developer tools opened up and I have my file loaded up that I'm editing over here. And I'm going to reload and check it out. I've got Bob and I've got Smith. Now instead of having to say person.firstname or person.lastname, I can simply say first name or last name. So this is the heart of what object destructuring is. We are destructuring the desired properties off of this object into variables. Now, if you come in here and actually look at the person object, you will see the properties have not gone anywhere. So if you come into here, you'll see person still has first name and last name. So destructuring doesn't actually destroy the original object. It just uses the names of the properties to actually produce variables and then copies the values over. In addition to being able to pull off these properties, we could also do aliasing. For example, let's say I already had a variable, first name, that was equal to Jane. Clearly, destructuring first name off of person into a new variable would have a variable conflict with the first name we already have declared. In fact, if I were to save this and try to run this code, you'll see we'll actually get an error. So we can do something called aliasing. We can come in and use a colon, and we could say fn. And so now, instead of saying first name, I can say fn and get the same result. So here's Bob once again. So what's happening here is that we're destructuring the property first name off of person, but we're actually storing it in an fn variable instead of first name. So this is useful when you have conflicts and stuff like that. Something else cooler that you can do as well is something along these lines. Let's say I have an address. So I have street, and I have 123 Oak Lane, and I have my state, and let's say we are in the great state of Florida. So let's say I wanted to extract the actual street property off of address. No problem. I could come into here and I could do the following. In addition to destructuring first name and last name, we're going to destructure address. There we go. But this time when we do our aliasing, instead of aliasing and just to another variable name, we're going to do some destructuring off the alias. So now I could say street. And we'll move that down to the next line. So now I could come down to here and I could say console.log street. And so now I was able to destructure street off of address through the use of the alias and be able to pull that into its own variable. So now if I came over here and reloaded, now I have 123 Oak Lane. What's cool about this is that in your code, if you were constantly saying person.address.street, that actually takes a little bit of time for JavaScript to be able to find that street property and then ultimately reference the value. Because of the nature of prototype inheritance and how objects are looked up and the properties are referenced, it actually has to repeat the lookup of address on person each time you request it, and look up the property street on address each time you request it. So the actual act of doing this process here, of actually looking it up, takes a little bit of time. However, if you do destructuring, you do that lookup once, and then it's just a matter of accessing that variable that has the final value that you are in fact looking for. So now if we come into here and expand this out, you can see there's address in our 123 Oak Lane. Another common usage of destructuring is with functions and their parameters. So I'm going to actually just wrap all of this here in a comment. And we'll grab our person. And we're going to create a function here. And we're going to have print full name. Now, you could pass person in here if you wanted to. And then we'll have our actual arrow there. There we go. Now, you could pass person in here if you wanted to. And you could say console.log person.firstname plus space plus person.lastname. You could do this, and that would be perfectly fine. And then when you called print full name, you could pass in our actual person object, which we'll define here. And in fact, just for fun, let's actually rename this to the person. Actually, let's just rename it to P. That way the line's not so long on the screen. P. So I could take person here, pass that in, and it'll destructure, or actually not destructure, it'll pass in person, then we'll reference first and last name off of P. And if I were to run this code, you'll see I end up with Bob Smith. But I could also use destructuring to destructure first and last name off. I could say first name, and then I could say last name. And then I could come down here, get rid of the P, save that, and now I still have Bob Smith. So the advantage to this is if you have an object being passed in, but you only want a couple of properties, you could actually destructure off the properties that you want and then be able to make use of it. Notice we don't have an address or anything like that inside of here because we only chose to destructure first name and last name. So as you can see, object destructuring is a very, very powerful JavaScript tool for being able to work with properties that are defined on objects.